All right, should we get started? Yes, I think the only thing on the agenda is 1.23 planning doc.
Sure. Should I share my screen or is somebody else planning to share?
Yeah, if you can share, that would be great.
Sure. Let me just do the sharing here. All right. Okay. So I started this doc a couple weeks ago, right before 122 officially released, just to keep track of some of the things that we were discussing that we want to wrap up. Oh, awesome! There's a lot of stuff that's been added, so that's awesome. Wanted to kind of bring this front and center since we're not too far away from the 122 release and not too deeply into kind of our 123 development period to take a second and look at what are the things that we've come up with so far. What things do you see that are missing, and kind of try to put together just some sort of a plan. I know there's a lot of we can assume a good bit of work is going to be done around kind of ambient feedback. But in the meantime, it would be good to kind of see what things are left to be done in Istio and try to see where folks have time to work on it. So I can go through the doc, but I see John has a lot of brainstorming here toward the bottom. We can spend some time adding things to the doc before discussing it more fully, or we can just start firing off what folks want to see added and do it that way. I don't have a big preference. Oh, wonderful! John's mic is broken. Okay, so in oh, okay, wonderful. Do you want to go through your brainstorming section of the doc and sort of about we discuss where they fit and what the effort might be for some of those?
Sure. This is like just a brain dump I had a few months ago, actually, so I just copied it over. So I can go through it. This is not necessarily things that I think we should do in the short term or that are, low cost, high return. But something we should start considering. So some things that are using KRT more, service entry controller and the core Kubernetes controller seem like obvious next places to do it if we're going to. I think, yeah, Keith had this up there, but service IP matching for outbound so we can meet the gamma conformance, and I mean, there's other reasons to do it as well. Pod IP matching so we can handle traffic that's directly to pods and do things like MTLS and telemetry, giving sidecars parity with ambient, which does this. Locality load balancing that doesn't rely on outlier detection, so you can have kind of zero config outlier detection, or sorry, locality load balancing, which would use Kubernetes Health instead to get the same functionality. We do Delta XGS now on by default 1.22, yay, but it's not very incremental. We still send up way too much stuff, so all sorts of optimizations there. Auto allocation, we already talked about that the last week or maybe 2 weeks. So that's in progress. Filtering clusters and gateways. Today we sent all the clusters to all the gateways, even if they're not using them. We've had an experimental setting for like 3 years to filter them out. But there's a small issue with it when routes change, causes downtime. That would be big performance win for large clusters. Remove Istio validation and the CNI race. I mean, I put this on here. This was my wish list, not a list of things to do for 1.23, actually. Still don't know a way to do this, but if we could, that would be great. Remove the Istio operator. I think Keith had this above. Yeah, or deprecate. I don't know. Something towards, negative on the operator. The other thing too is we can make our Istio Cuddle install the Converge more and more with just being Helm install. To the extreme, it's literally just an alias for Helm install. I don't think we'll get that far, but we could make it do a lot more Helm-like things probably. And the idea there is one converged behavior and whatever with Helm, and less maintenance for us so that we're maintaining less stuff. So like one obvious thing would be like maybe we need to start making Helm releases, for example, which would maybe enable someone to migrate off of Istio Cuddle to Helm like totally seamlessly because Helm doesn't even know that it wasn't the one that initially installed it. Things like that, I don't know, that needs more fleshing out, obviously. The whole analysis framework in Istio is kind of problematic. It's really inefficient and it's decoupled from the actual code that it's analyzing. So you end up with all these false positives and false negatives. So some sort of rewrite of that would probably make sense to have that be integrated with some of the KRT work, although depending on how we do that, that may put some blockers of like having to migrate the entire world before we can migrate the analysis, which is not great. But I think we could probably do something incremental if someone's willing to invest some time there. Is this useful just reading everything, or do we want to talk about each one?
I was going to finish out the rest of the doc after you went through your section.
Okay.
But we can dive deeper if you like.
No, it's fine. Yeah, next one, multi-cluster secret updates. Today when we update this multi-cluster secret, we delete it and then we add it back. So there's like some small period of time where we delete all the objects for that cluster before we add them all back. It'd be nice to not do that. There's a lot of prior art on this. If someone actually wants to do this, I can hook you up with what me and Steven have talked about here in the past. Access logs via ECDS. Yeah, the access logs take up like half of the XGS size a lot of times. It seems like we should be able to just send one blob of access logs to Envoy, which probably means converting them to be something that you can pass over ECDS. So that'd be good for performance when it doesn't have to be ECDS. It's more just reducing the overhead of access logs on XDS. Policy attachment to routes. That's, we talk a lot about policy attachment. So actually getting that done. It's actually interesting because with waypoints, it doesn't really matter that much for waypoints now because we already have attachment to service, but it's still useful for ingress and whatnot. Dynamic debouncing for XDS. This is a very niche one, but today we do this debouncing for config updates, and it's stuck at 100 milliseconds between objects, which is kind of, it's like not long enough necessarily, because if you just do a big kubectl apply like 100 objects, they're usually over 100 milliseconds apart, so we end up doing 100 pushes. It'd be kind of nice to have something a little smarter so we can batch things appropriately such that we have low latency, but also don't just, kill CPU for no reason. But that needs a lot of fleshing out on what is actually good there. More cell for CRDs. So we did some cell in telemetry and WASM. That there's like 7 other APIs and they don't have any cell stuff. It would be good to start fleshing all that out. Obviously, the eventual goal is that we can represent enough of our validation that we don't actually even need the webhook. There's some stuff that can never be done in cell, but it will be some like niche stuff. Like there's some stuff we don't do in webhook, so it's fine to not do 100% of validation at admission time, I think. And then we can give users kind of the choice to not run validation, but still have the same cluster. But that needs, a lot of people to just go do a lot of work on converting a bunch of rules from Go to cell. And then I also had, I didn't write this down, but kind of a test framework for fuzzing cell versus validation webhook to make sure that they're given the same behavior. So if someone wants to work on that, we should probably revive that and bring that out. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in my stash. On-demand DNS queries in Envoy. Today, when you make a DNS cluster in Envoy, it's just doing DNS resolution every 30 seconds constantly from every Envoy in the cluster to every service entry. It's not uncommon for people to report that they're sending like 100,000 QPS to their DNS server because of this, which is ridiculous. It'd be nice if Envoy just was kind of a normal application into DNS when it needs to, instead of all the time. And finally, Envoy stats are like, they're all represented as these like flat strings. And then in order to turn them into meaningful stats, we do a regex extraction of the tags and turn them into like a structured object. This is, I don't know, it's kind of not great. Aside from making me feel bad, it also is, we always run into bugs around extracting things incorrectly. It would be nice if we just didn't have to do that and just stored stats in a structured manner like they actually are in reality. So that's everything. There's actually nothing about ambient on this list. There's probably a lot of ambient stuff, but it's kind of already we have a fairly thought out ambient next steps on the ambient beta doc. So
Awesome. You reminded me of another one that I don't have on here, but we'll get to that here in a second. Okay, so as far as the general stuff that I already had on here, appreciate John for adding more. And some things to think about are like ambience. I'll be more specific here: ambient / sidecar interop. Making them work together. I know we had talked about some work that needed to be done to Envoy's like HBone / Connect support. I'm not sure we are on that, but that might be interesting in either 123 or 124 to try to attack that. John already mentioned the service IP matching for outbound. That's under scary changes because my understanding is it would be a fairly invasive code change for sidecars, and that's something we have to really consider if we want that to how we want that to work. Other stuff in tech debt paydown, deprecate, remove Istio operator. Whitney did some kind of exploratory stuff to try to highlight and uncover what needed to actually happen to deprecate it. But towards the end, as the release deadline loomed, we kind of ran out of we all ran out of bandwidth to keep pushing it forward. Might be good to revive that, especially if we're potentially close to getting that done. I know several users still, even with the warning, are using operator and are looking for more clarity here from the community. Ambient conformance tests for CNI other than Kainet and Calico. Yes, I like this one. Not sure who added this. I think maybe did, but appreciate the addition here. Because if Ambient's going to claim to work for, approximately every CNI, would be good to actually have that codified in tests somewhere. IPv6 tests. That's something we need to add as well.
I called out ambient specifically because I think it may actually be easier to cover IPv6 for just ambient, and it also sort of makes a little bit more sense since we were thinking people might use net new installations, right? So, but either way, like aside from the feature thing, it's just like it's good to keep people from baking assumptions into the code about like, oh, pods have one IP and it's this. It's like, no, they don't. So yeah, just from a hygiene perspective.
Yeah, big agree. Because every time we make that assumption, it's something we have to undo as we add more IPv6 features.
There are a lot of places where we make assumptions like that, yeah, or can.
Exactly. Yeah, big +1 for me on that. Yeah, thanks for adding that. What else? Semi-automated Z-ton performance regression tests. Yes, I think last summer we had an intern that worked on some benchmarks, some macro benchmarking. I can't remember if that made it into CI or not. But yeah, anything we can do to add more like regression tests from PR to PR would be great because Z-ton is very performance sensitive. I put this one on here. We do have the kind of long running tests, but even like the existing stability tests that we've got and the tools repo don't do a ton. John mentioned a lot of the, I'll say, inadequacies of the current test of the what was the existing test framework, stability test framework, and I agree with those. We should consider at some point, maybe it's this release, maybe it's soon, but writing an actual stability test suite that tests churn and things like that. And then the last one, I don't know that there's a lot we can do in 123 for Istio, but want to get it on folks' brains. But make MCS API support actually work within Istio. I think Istio does have some support. Someone can correct me on the details. Maybe it works better than I think it does. But last I checked, it was still either alpha or experimental. And I think that especially with system revitalization happening a little bit over in Sync multi-cluster, that it would be good for us to figure out what the plan is for Istio and to see what work remains on that. From what I understand, it's unfinished. Other items, as Mike finishes writing, so doc improvements, switch to the ambient wrapper chart in some of our docs. I added this bullet point as far as revisiting the taxonomy of our documentation. There are a lot of questions and a lot of discussion for the ambient release, / the 122 release around how things are organized in our docs. We made decisions that I think are fine, especially for 122, but I don't think that we've thought through the user journey from a documentation perspective in a while, and it might be a good time to start doing that. And this is actually like a sub point. Like maybe one way to go about doing that is to write a doc for, hey, what does our ideal documentation look like? How we want a reader to experience our ideal documentation, and then build what comes through the servicing of that doc. And then, of course, ambient related work around sidecar interrupt, HAZ tunnel. I think Mitch has already started, has circulating a doc on some of the details of how to accomplish that. Implementing status for authorization policy. This one, I would say, is, in my opinion, at least, one of the fairly high priority ones. It's a really nice UX benefit that was a narrow miss from the 122 release. That's the beta release. And it would be really good to make that a fast follow. Telemetry API support. I think this is for Z-tunnel specifically. I don't know that we have a strong, maybe we do and I missed it, but I don't remember there being a super strong documentation around like what to what extent telemetry API supported in Z-tunnel versus waypoint, so it'd be good to codify that. Ian had a really, Ian and others, I can't remember who exactly was there, but there's a great conversation around admin scoped policy when it comes to target ref. So how do you say that I want this off Z policy to apply to every waypoint by default unless it has its own policy? I don't think that works today, because currently if you just have a waypoint in a name, or sorry, if you have a policy in the Istio system namespace or your admin namespace, then it'll apply to all proxies, not all waypoints specifically. There are a couple of options here, but I think Ian's going to talk more about that in the next ambient meeting, so I'll leave that space for him. Waypoint resource configuration, yes. So being able to customize the way that I don't know, things about the waypoint deployments. So different resource and memory limits, or think these are bad examples, but there are, yeah, I've seen several issues on GitHub and Slack. And this is also Gateway API for Gateway API gateways in general. The Gateway Infrastructure GEP, GEP, which I think John was pushing at one point, and I think it should be graduating to standards soon. Like the annotations and labels one should be graduating soon. We need to figure out like to what extent that should be, like how much of the Kubernetes pod spec should be fit into there, and what Istio wants to support. And then lastly, in the ambient section, off policy enforcement of waypoint for traffic from an ingress gateway. Yeah, so making sure that the waypoint is enforcing policy when getting ingress gateway traffic. That's what I've got, or what we've got so far in the 123 planning doc. I'm sure it's not everything. There are lots of things to do, but hopefully this is a good starting point for folks as far as what I envisioned for next steps. Want to try to get this doc representative of what we want to what we plan to try to tackle in 123, and then once you feel that it's representative, start assigning owners to it. Lynn, I know for the ambient beta, at one point you had a drop ambient to beta doc. I don't know if we plan to do something similar for stable to track ambient stability, or what we want to try to tackle more advanced features like multi-cluster, multi-network, etc. But not sure it belongs here in 123 specifically, but that might be good to have in parallel so we can map items release by release into the general stable milestone. But yeah, that's what I've got so far. I'll stop talking now and see if folks have questions, things they want to add, or any discussion people want to have on specific topics. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Still muted. Am I good now? So
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
perfect. Okay. Yeah, I added a few things. I can't comment on it now, but I requested access. But the first one is question for John about the analysis. Is that related to, I like the GitHub issue that you put for updating the analyzer for Istio CTL. Is that the same thing? I don't think you can talk, so I'll just wait for him to respond to that in the chat.
I can, but I need to go find the link and whatnot. So I'll
Yeah, no
respond in the chat.
I just want to make sure that wasn't hidden. And then the other thing is it's integration test related. We might want to look into this. Might not be a big task, but we should revisit the run skip ambient tests. Maybe we don't need to skip ambient for certain test cases anymore, so might want to audit that again. I put the link there as well. It's for the traffic integration tests. So I know there's a bunch of test related things in the tech debt pay down. Maybe this fits in there somewhere. Just wanted to highlight that.
Any other comments on the doc?
I think this is a great doc. Thank you for starting this. My only comment is for the big features we have in this doc, maybe not immediately, but I'm trying to think about how to communicate this to users. And I think what user cares about is the feature status. So we have to think through, what are we targeting? For example, interop with sidecar, right? That's already in alpha. In 1.22, are we attempting to target beta for 123?
I think Costin was going to say something and then dropped. Are you back, Costin?
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't try to respond. I had a separate comment. If anyone wants to answer to Lynn's.
Oh, sure. So, yeah, I think my keys fell. But yeah, I think the feature status of some of these is it's a good point. I think.
I mean, it's fair we don't know until who is willing to sign up for what.
Yeah, I think we need to know how much work is there for things like sidecar interrupt, for example. It's hard to determine if aiming for beta is realistic for this release. I think that's part of this planning process, though. Look, when we have the unknowns, you want to try to limit what unknowns there are so you can make plans for things, because it could turn out assuming we don't have a great idea, although I think Stephen was looking at it last, but my info may be old. But if sidecar interop has all this hidden complexity, it might not make a ton of sense for us to try to spend the entire release working on that. If there's not a high probability of it being done. So I think that's where figuring out like the ideal 123 feature set, the things you want to investigate, and then if we can figure out what the unknowns are and get a fuller picture of what's possible, then we can have kind of a more of a realistic roadmap that it happened last release. Like there are things that are going to fall from scope and be pushed to the next release. But if we can get to a good like candidate milestone, that'll be good, I think.
Yeah, agreed. What about sandwich? I know it's not user facing. Should we have it anywhere? Or because if it's not user facing, we don't need to have it on the roadmap. I'm trying to think about like the interop, right? That's where maybe sandwich would play. And I think one of the other tasks, make sure the traffic from ingress enforced by waypoint.
Or opposite. That was actually what I was trying to do. Why I raised my hand to ask about the same thing. I mean, I don't see sandwich on the list, but I assume it's work will be approved and merged if someone is doing it. Yeah, for traffic being enforced in gateway or in waypoints, that I think we hit still up the debate how, but should be enforced somewhere. The other comment I had is traditionally in Istio from the very beginning to now, we have far more ambitious plans than we can deliver. I mean, the list seems far for sufficient for 3 or 4 releases, not for one. And it will be very useful to have some idea about what people, which of them have people who are committed to it and have some form of owners who are driving it forward, and kind of see if we can trim down or reprioritize some of the stuff to make sure that that we don't rush stuff, like including this sandwich or stuff, which again we may need feedback. It may take longer. We don't know because it's a complicated problem, but we should not have a set deadline, but it's kind of something that if people are willing to work on, it will make progress.
Yeah, I agree, Costin. I think this is where it would be useful to get as we have kind of this list of things populated by the community. It'd be useful for TOC to weigh in and say, hey, here's what we see as being the most critical for the project, keeping in mind the waypoint announcement in mind, all the requests and gaps over the years. Like I appreciate some of the things in John's brainstorming list, because these are some issues that we've had in Istio. Some of them for a little while. A lot of them are performance driven, and that's not always really easily measured. And I think that would be really useful data and direction when it comes to what TOC sees as being critical.
Yeah, one thing I want to also add on this. I don't know how important for people the interop testing and defining the baseline is, but it would help a lot, including in scoping those features down to prioritize documenting what is part of the interop requirement or baseline or whatever we want to call it, and to make sure that we have clearly defined protocols and specifications for each layer, so we are not kind of every feature and environment variables become an API that we cannot turn off. So if we have a clear documentation of what it's a implementation detail and what it's supposed to be expected at interop level, probably it will help in the implementation as well.
Agreed. Anyone else? I saw John unmute earlier. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I agree. Like, this is the brainstorm. Now we need to go make this into a list. I don't think it's just TOC though. Like, we need kind of the intersection of what the project thinks is important and what people are willing and able to do. And I would put extreme skepticism on like 90% of my items. The reason they're on my wish list is because they're hard enough that I didn't just go do them sometime in the past 5 years. So none of them are easy or low hanging fruit, right? Otherwise it'd already be done. So even if I was to say, and the whole TOC was to say, like, let's go make Envoy stat structured, that's not enough unless someone that's an Envoy expert is willing to commit a lot of energy on that, right? But yes, we should curate this into like the prioritized, committed list, and probably joined with the ambient list, where I suspect a lot of the efforts will actually go.
Yeah, agreed. I think that we need the intersection of various data points, one of which being community need, one of the other ones are expertise and bandwidth, in addition to and this is about what I was trying to get across earlier was like, what does like TOC's opinion as well. And I think there's some function given those inputs that gives us our ideal list. And we need to get all those get those inputs, because even if we can't knock out some of the large TOC wish lists, for example, maybe we can make incremental progress. Maybe we can start conversations with partner projects such as Envoy. Maybe we can maybe if we don't do it this release, we can talk about next release, or maybe we pivot to a different feature entirely that we can tackle. So I guess the action item for everybody here is just put your thoughts in the doc somewhere, maybe in the next TOC meeting, which I think is next week or week after next. You can get some TOC feedback. I think it's week after next.
Okay. I don't think we have anything else. We do have a lot of stuff on the still review list, but I suspect maybe most of it's stale. Anything else, or should we reconvene in 20 minutes for the ambient discussions?
Sounds good.